Okay.
All
Um,
right.
I'll let you get started, Brittany.
Yeah, so good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Um, really quickly, just a reminder, since we are in Zoom webinar, we are recording this. So if you have to hop off for any reason, please feel free to do so. We will have this available in a recorded format later. You are able to chat. So if you have any questions or comments throughout, please feel free to put those in the chat. Since we are on Zoom webinar, I don't know, you can raise your hand and I can allow you to unmute and talk and communicate with us that way if you would prefer to do so. But Zoom webinar doesn't show videos other than ours, and kind of has it a little less interactive, but we definitely want to hear from you all. So the chat is open if you have questions or comments throughout. I do have two screens. So if I'm looking over here, my camera's over here, but I'm still with you, I promise. My name is Brittany Boston, and I am with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support. And we do a lot of work with the Illinois Community College Board in supporting and providing professional development, resources, tools, all of those fun things for the community college system. And so today, along with my colleague Dalton Byers, who I will let introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. I'm also obviously with ICSPS with Brittany. I'm specifically an educational outreach and research specialist. I came in towards halfway point of this project to help take a lot of what Brittany and some of the team has done already and work with kind of creating this framework. So I'm excited to talk about it and to hear your questions and answer questions and imagine how we can serve students better today.
Yeah, and so we're going to spend the next hour with you. We may wrap up a little bit earlier, but really just introducing you to our framework for community partnerships, or community mapping, as we've been calling it. Sort of a loose term there when it comes to community mapping. Okay, so what was kind of the purpose of this? So our center, ICSPS, which we are housed at Illinois State University, along with ICCB, the Illinois Community College Board, we worked with 7 community colleges who were participating in the ADAMAT initiative, or the Access to Training Opportunities in Manufacturing and Technology. And so this was really meant to help in developing community recruitment and an engagement framework for their students. And so this was through some funds from the U.S. Department of Labor Strengthening Community College Training Grant Program. And so that's really where the initiative took shape and kind of what was kind of behind the scenes forming the next process that you'll see occurring throughout. And so the goal of this framework and the conversations that took place were really to work with the 7 community colleges to identify effective recruitment methods, and also looking at potential solutions when it comes to student barriers, right? So what are those pieces that are preventing students from participating in these training programs? We were also assisting them in looking at some external resources, whether that's community partners, or even those internal partners within the community college as well. And so what is the role that they could play in helping, again, reduce those barriers for students? So those were our 2 main goals when we went into this process. And then these are the 7 colleges that we worked with. If any of you all are familiar with the state of Illinois, you know she's a very long state. We have a lot of city, rural, urban areas. And so these were the 7 colleges that we worked with. We had some Southern Illinois representation, Central Illinois. We didn't go too far north, but we did have some Northern Illinois represented as well. And so these were the ones that we communicated with, but obviously this framework is designed for the community college system as a whole. And as I go through this, if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to put those in the chat. I do have it open over here and Dalton is monitoring it for me as well.
Mhm.
So when we were going through, we did have a very specific or targeted populations in mind. So we were specifically looking at low-income students, students of color, and women. And even within those populations, the priority focus or main focus was on individuals who are either unemployed or underemployed, veterans, individuals from a special population. So if you are familiar with Perkins, you know that the special populations there, and specifically for this project, it was those receiving benefits from adult education, so English as a second language, and those receiving benefits from disability services. And so the emphasis for this was to enhance sort of that understanding and implementation of ICAPS programs. And so ICAPS stands for Integrated Career and Academic Preparation Systems. We don't have enough time to go too deep into what ICAPS is, but we can be sure once I'm done, I can throw in a link in the chat to our ICAPS website to help. If you're not familiar with what ICAPS is, that'll give you a little bit more background knowledge. But basically, that is Illinois' version of an IET, of an integrated education training system. So getting that academic aspect of it while also getting that workforce training as well. And so the purpose of this was to hopefully increase enrollment in those ICAPS programs. So our little landscape analysis, these were some of the main questions that we were looking at. We asked the community colleges, as well as our team kind of doing our own research, whether that was online or when we did our in-person visits, which I'll talk about here momentarily. We actually drove around the local area and did it the old school way, just driving around, seeing what kind of partnerships, what employers were in the area and things that we could see. So we were really looking at what those primary barriers for students were, who the colleges were currently partnering with, where those gaps in services were. So what were sort of those missing puzzle pieces when it came to supporting their students? Who could support the colleges in addressing those gaps? Again, that partnership piece, whether it was internal partnerships within the community college itself or those external partnerships. And then were there opportunities to partner? Were there opportunities to braid funding? Or were there opportunities to align resources, again, to support potential students, current students coming into those programs? And so those were the questions that really sort of shaped all of the conversations that we had with the colleges moving forward. So as I said, we did in-person interviews, but first we sent out a virtual survey. We also did with a few of them a couple of Zoom meetings, just scheduling wise, weren't able to get in-person visits in right away, but we did do in-person interviews as well. So with some of them, we potentially had 3 touch points, but with the majority of them, we had the virtual survey and an in-person interview. And so these are some of the survey findings. These were sent out to the colleges in September of 2024, just to give you kind of a little reference to the timeline there. And so these were some of the main barriers for students, which if you work at a community college, you are probably nodding your head and saying, yeah, I agree. All of those things plus more. But these were the main ones. So transportation, childcare, lack of awareness of the program, lack of access, lack of marketing, food insecurity was a big one, and access to housing. So these were the barriers that we focused on when it came to the framework. Again, this is not an exhaustive list, right? Especially depending on your local area and the student population that you are serving. I imagine it's all of these and more. but these were the ones we focused on for the tool. And again, the whole purpose of this was to partner with the colleges and to help find solutions to address these barriers. So that we really wanted to work with them as a team and looking at, again, sort of those internal partnerships that they could potentially enhance or build from the beginning, right? Because we know sometimes things get siloed even within our own community colleges. And then looking at those local partners as well, whether it's employers or other entities within the community that could assist our students with various services. So here are some of the in-person interview findings. Again, we had, I would say, a team of 2 to 3 go out to each community college. We did some research ahead of time, kind of looking at what was available both within the community college as well as the local area when it came to services and supports for students. We looked at their website as to, because a lot of times that is the first place that potential students go is the website. And so what did that look like? How many clicks did it take you to get to certain aspects of a website? And then when we were physically there on campus, we got tours of the campus and then also were able to take our time and kind of drive around the area as well and see what was available. Local transportation, if that was an option, whether they have additional, mental health services within the area. So we definitely did some investigating of our own, which was nice because there were some of the areas that, myself and other members of our team were not familiar with. And so it kind of gave us that perspective of being a potential student. Like, how easy is it to find out about these different services or about this program, the things available at the community college. So we were able to kind of come into it with fresh eyes like a potential student would as well. So as I mentioned, some of the barriers on that previous slide, we'll go through a little bit more in detail here. So when we're talking about lack of awareness of resources and services, it really is that, just students not being aware of the resources available to them, whether it's those provided by the community college themselves or even within the local area. And that could be something as simple as potentially maybe those resources not being marketed or shared out enough, or even just a student not putting themselves in the place of an individual who may need those resources, right? Support for students who are experiencing homelessness was one. You have students who, the term couch surfing is one that's used a lot, where it's, well, I'm staying at a buddy's this weekend, and then next weekend I'll be with my aunt. And so to them, they aren't considered homeless because they have a place to stay. But we know as educators and providers that per the McKinney-Vento definition, they qualify for services. So again, just that lack of awareness of what's available, but also what they have access to based off of their life circumstance at that particular time. And then lack of understanding, again, is doubled down by kind of that siloing that can happen within institutions. Departments can kind of have their nose to the grindstone, really focused on what they're doing and maybe not communicating that out, whether it's resources, new initiatives that have come about. And so just making sure that, faculty, advisors, all of the touch points that students have contact with, that they are also in the know of what's available for these students as well. Transportation challenges, again, I think most of you are probably nodding your head along to some of these. Like I had mentioned, Illinois is a very long, vast state where, if you're in the Chicago area, public transportation is a given. If you go further south, there is potentially public transportation, but the hours of operation can vary. And sometimes those don't align with a student's schedule of being able to attend class, work, and also utilize public transportation for an evening class, especially if that transportation stops at 7 p.m. and their class isn't over until 9 p.m. That's a barrier in and of itself. And then childcare, whether it's just the cost or just access to childcare. We know, especially for community college students, that the population of students who have, some of them work full time, some of them have kids, they have a life outside of their college environment that impacts their ability to show up and be present. And so when childcare costs are high or there isn't even access to proper childcare, that is a barrier that can prevent them from participating in the program and meeting those educational goals that they have set for themselves. Okay, so before I hand it over to Dalton to really get into the nitty-gritty of the framework and how to implement that, any questions? I'll take a moment here just to kind of let people put something into the chat, or you can raise your hand and I can unmute you. We'll sit in a little awkward silence for a few seconds. Okay, well, if you all have any questions throughout, please feel free. You can throw it into the chat and we will be monitoring that. And so with that, I'm going to stop my share and allow Dalton to show us the website.
Great. Excellent. Thank you so much, Brittany, for kind of giving us a lot of that important context about, what got us here and why we're having this conversation today. And so for reference, everyone, this is our ICSPS website. You get here, there's a nice little video. To get to the community mapping website, you go to CTE, Career and Technical Education, and then you can go to this community mapping spot. So it's right here. We can also go to our website /CTE/community mapping. And it's here that you'll be able to have an overview of all of the different sections of the website, which kind of mirror a lot of what our community mapping report looks like. I can't see myself, so hopefully you can see the report that we are sending out to the Student Services Office in all of the community colleges. So look forward to that. Oh, I think we got a chat. Okay, excellent. Thank you, Brittany. And so I want to start my conversation here with showing you the video. No, you can, if you're on your own device, you can click it and it'll play it right here. I'm going to go over here so that you can kind of see a little clearer what it looks like. Can we hopefully hear this?
The goal of this effort is to improve enrollment and completion of career-focused training programs at community colleges, especially for those students who need them most. Often, these students face significant barriers that prevent enrollment or completion of these programs. One specific strategy identified to overcome these barriers is to undertake a community mapping effort to identify all available resources from the community college and in the local community. The outcome of this effort will be a comprehensive, up-to-date, and effectively promoted student resource guide. Creating an effective student resource guide starts with collaboration. Assemble a cross-departmental team, including support staff and students, to define your goals and set a clear project timeline. Next, gather and develop content. Identify the list of community partners and departments that need to be included, and determine which details you need to gather from every department and community partner. Once information is collected, organize and design the guide for ease of use and accessibility. Before launch, pilot the draft with a diverse student group for feedback. Once complete, train faculty, staff, and student leaders on the resource guide. Disseminate the comprehensive resource guide through a large-scale media blitz, including email, website, social media, student portals, and in-class announcements. Finally, keep it current. Use feedback surveys to update the guide every semester, ensuring it remains a reliable cornerstone for student success.
Excellent. Okay. Were we able to hear me? Since I don't have any chats, I'm assuming that's a yes. Okay. So that was a 90-second bullet, so fast explanation as to kind of what this project is and the tool that it is produced in partnership with the community college system. So, like, I'm now going to go way slower and kind of walk through a lot of those steps and kind of the website itself. So, this top section is an overview, a lot of the things that talking about who funded this, kind of that kind of context that Brittany has already provided. Um, Next, just for a quick reference, you can always click these and jump around. I love it because I sometimes know exactly where to go, and if I'm especially using a trackpad, it can be a lot easier just to click here than to like scroll and scroll and scroll. So this framework here, this again is a lot of those same questions, the same information that Brittany showed, but there's a blue button here. This is where you can get a digital version of that framework. This all the like content and information that's on this website is at least in some part also present here. So feel free to download this and you can like dig through it kind of, after the webinar, hopefully. Um, so just to reiterate some of the things that Brittany has said, we have the research findings, which identifies a lot of those primary barriers from our surveys and from our interviews. You can see those. She's already read through a lot of this, so I'm not gonna like repeat everything she's saying, but you can click through them in this sort of way. I like to know how to actually use websites sometimes, so this is why I'm kind of reiterating some of that information like that. But now I get to have the fun part of like actually talking about some of the solutions. So one of the solutions I was talking about in the video is this sort of comprehensive resource guide. And so there's a lot of nuances and aspects to that, as well as how do we actually like help students know what's going on or access what we already have. Because one of the things that like we all know about just trying to start any initiative or especially like wraparound services things. Sometimes it's like, okay, that's great. We do want to support our students. Also, where's the money? And so one of the ways that we can kind of address some of that without being like, hello, institution, hello, supervisors, hello, board of trustees, we need lots of new money to do this thing, is like, okay, but how can we make sure the students are already aware of and utilizing the resources that are already there for them? That was really a prominent identified thing that that was an issue for some of the community colleges. And so one of the ways I'm going to kind of show you here is through a media blitz. So this can take a lot of different forms. It's email can sometimes be the right way to do that. Sometimes students may not be the most diligent with reading their email. So sometimes that means social media posts. It can look like putting up flyers in high traffic areas on bulletin boards near classes, things of that sort. Or if, especially if you have strong relationships with faculty and especially general education courses that may have a higher volume of students, trying to take just a few minutes. And I would want to emphasize like very brief amount of time in their classes because obviously they have a lot going on. They need to cover material, and they are already, probably struggling in some way. Excuse me, to get through all of that with their students and to maintain their attention and things. So just a few minutes to be like, hey, we have this resource guide or we have this brochure that has a lot of information about the resources that are available to you on campus and off of campus. Like here, like, as you're leaving class today, feel free to pick up a pamphlet, and you can always come to me at this, center on campus or in this office space on campus. And I clearly identify where that is and have contact information available so the students can like access that later. QR codes are another way to make these brochures, flyers, and like communication a little more seamless because students are going to have their phones on them. It may not always be the easiest way for them to like navigate like getting information, but it is a way. Um, Next is an intake form. Some of the colleges like have an excellent like quick and seamless intake form that we saw that was like, okay, that is a great way to be able to like help students I like communicate the needs that they do have and then be able to receive information like that's relevant to them. And so if you have like a resource hub, having a link or QR code to an intake form that allows students to identify the needs that they have and then receive communication and information that's relevant to them, like in a timely manner, that's great. If so, like in that, I would avoid like really highly technical language or like making the form way too long. Um, I know that sometimes even the surveys that we send out after webinars can sometimes just feel like they're just droning on. Or if I go to a conference and I'm like doing a survey and it's like page after page, it's just like, okay, it's not that serious. I'm gonna move on. And that can be true for a lot of different form filling out. And so if it can be pretty concise while still including a lot of the relevant information, that could be great. Um, and it's important that you ensure that there is timely follow-up. So if the intake form is, you fill it out, you're in need, you're like, I haven't, I don't know where I'm gonna sleep this weekend, or I haven't eaten in a couple days and I could really use, some sort of emergency, like, a wraparound support, or like I'm fine right now, but I know that my paycheck is not gonna make it to the end. Um, this intake form can be a way to make sure that these students can have someone reach out to them for support and maybe including somewhere in that form a level of urgency. Like between the I don't know where I'm sleeping tonight versus "Mm, I don't know where I'm going to be sleeping next week. Like that's a different urgency. And so maybe figuring out how you can gauge that in the form. And if immediate responses or quick turnaround isn't possible, try to work with IT or like with whatever internal systems you may already have to figure out how you can do automated replies. And if bonus points, if you can have those automated replies tailored to the responses within the form. I'm not a tech guru, so that could be, pretty complicated. But even just an automatic reply that says like, thank you for filling out the form. For like immediate information, you can go to these like links, like few links. And if it's like a, dire emergency, call 911. Sometimes it can be easy to forget to put in information like that, but like if it's a mental health crisis or there is like an emergency that requires like 911, it's important to have like to remind the student like this is an intake form, not um, a crisis hotline. And so those are very different things. Um, campus tours. Um, trying to work with admissions and other like campus tour like providers on your campus to include the support services and trying to incorporate them in and around the same sort of like areas as things like the library services and like campus activities and things so that the stigma around accessing food pantries, counseling services, homelessness support, and even veteran services, like aren't as stigmatized. Sometimes students are worried that if they go to these support services areas that they, will be seen lesser than, or they get anxious about, having need. And so if we can show that like the same thing as going to the library to get a book for your report is just as, normal as going to the food pantry so that you can eat, so you can focus on that report. And so kind of trying to break down some of those stigma could be very helpful. Um, we'll talk more about the comprehensive resource guide, but having physical media reports and it's like paper copies of things can be helpful so that students can easily grab and go, especially if, phone is running low on battery or they're just absolutely tired of constantly having to look at the phone for everything. But in contrast to that, offering virtual tours of different spaces on campus could be helpful, especially if it's short form, allowing students to kind of just get a quick glimpse as to like, okay, what is the food pantry going to look like? Or when I go talk to VA services or the homelessness support center or person, like what can I expect? Because a lot of students may just have some anxiety around initiating that conversation around like where's it even located. And so having these even virtual tours could be a way to let students feel like they have some familiarity when they go into a situation that's already stressful. Um, so that's helpful. And then also kind of talked about this already, but that centralized resource. Um, this is something that can be useful for both faculty, staff, and students. Frequently, faculty and staff know about some of the resources that they either had to utilize when they were students or currently, or even just like because it's near them, but they may not know what's going on in another area. And that can be as simple as advising and like accessibility office, or as, applied to our current conversation about like the food pantry. Like it's very feasible that some of the support staff or faculty have no awareness as to whether there is a food pantry on campus or not, and thus can't direct students to go find that if it is there. Um, so that's where this centralized resource can help everyone create an environment and a culture on campus where seeking support is feasible because they know it exists, as well as less stigmatized because everyone can promote it, and it's not as like a okay, well, you have this need, go talk to that person who then tells you to go talk to that person. It can create a culture where it's like you have to run around everywhere and tell everyone that you're having a problem before you can find a solution, which can be very isolating. Um, and then also, and this isn't always feasible, but if you can locate like wraparound supports near things like library services or other like more commonly used support services, that could also reduce some of the anxiety for some students. So. Um, this moves us on to kind of the next section, which is solutions. Oh, nope. We call them case studies, but they're really just contextualized solutions. So it's kind of moving on to some of those specific things that Brittany was talking about. We have transportation. If your screen is bigger, you'd be able to see all of this a little easier. You can always hit next and previous, which will take you to childcare and wraparound services. But just for kind of a brief overview as to what each of these things are talking about. For transportation, we saw or some ideas between some of the community colleges that they were talking about are things like carpooling programs, where maybe giving prioritized parking spaces, or like allowing students to network and connect with one another to see if like, hey, we live in the same general area. Is there a way that we could, coordinate transportation together? Or maybe if there is a public transportation like option that is like near but not walking distance from your college, is there a way to do any sort of shuttling program, either through the carpooling or through the university, or I'm sorry, the college itself? That's also an option. That is kind of breaking one of my rules of like, if you don't have it, that may, cost and have kind of some labor implications. So that could be a challenge, but also is a potential solution. Um, if we can advocate or help like establish well-lit bike paths in areas where students can lock up their bikes where it feels secure. That could also help students who have a way of transport, like getting to campus and to class, but may not utilize it because of like, well, I can't afford for this to get stolen or damaged. So if they feel more secure about uh, where they're leaving their belongings, that could also help. And finally, online and hybrid classes are ways to address transportation challenges, either by making like having students have to travel to campus less often, or partnering with places like local libraries to like help students identify that, oh, I have study spaces I can go to. So even if that doesn't limit the number of times I have to make it to campus, if they're trying to just find a place to work on homework that isn't traveling all the way to campus. Maybe the local library is a free and accessible space for them to go to work on their coursework. Childcare, this one's very challenging, especially if your campus doesn't have existing facilities, but possibly working with local partners to see if priority slots can be given. I know that they fill up very quickly, so if your college has strong relationships or could develop stronger relationships with these centers, that could allow for students, parenting students that have children. My goodness, my brain kind of just lost it there. Um, to be able to know that there's a reliable space for them to have childcare, or if there is just like a fluke incident where a student normally has childcare, but it falls through and financially they can't manage to like have that audible, that like kind of backup plan, or their existing backup plans have fallen through. Like, is there a possibility for like an emergency fund to help kind of cover that gap, or creating family-friendly spaces on campus where students with children can study or work on classwork with their children still around. That could also kind of create a more inclusive and welcoming environment for those students. And then finally, wraparound services um, is obviously very important. Having dedicated case managers is really a proven kind of way to help these students integrate academic, financial, and mental health supports, career guidance, basic needs. So if there are people that are existing already in this space, um, supporting them, helping them, manage their caseload well, which I'm sure would be very challenging. If there aren't, figuring out how existing roles may be able to think more systematically and like collaboratively with others on campus to support the students is helpful. That's where this intake form would be super relevant for this sort of case manager, and thinking of how rhythms of student need may be relevant. So when like kind of at-risk students or like high stress times of the year, things like registration. I think at least one of our community colleges is having registration day opens today. And so like today would be a pretty high stress time. And so maybe checking in with students last week or maybe this week about like, hey, how are you doing? Financial aid deadlines are another really good time to be like checking with students of like, hey, how can we support you? What do you need? What are some of your major barriers? So those are aspects to keep in mind there. So that gets us through that sort of contextualized solutions to some of the barriers that Brittany had shown us, which takes us now to our implementation framework. So this is all about the comprehensive resource guide. Before I jump into that, how are people feeling? I'm kind of running. People good? Do we have any hands up, questions?
I was giving it a beat there, seeing how long we could go in silence. I don't see any hands or any
Okay.
questions, but yeah, you all can feel free throughout if you want to throw it in the chat. I'm monitoring, so
Awesome. Okay, thank you. So I was kind of already starting to scroll down through this section. So this section is also exists in the report, at least in a somewhat modified fashion of it. But at the bottom of it, this is going to be really easy to miss if you're kind of just like skimming through and kind of swiping through, is that we have a community mapping organizational framework. And that's what this section is really dedicated to. It then produces this fillable PDF, And so in that intro video and a lot of what we're talking about creating this comprehensive resource guide is can be found right here as well. And so this gives you a lot of the prompts of things that you may want to think about as you um, work with other people on campus to create a comprehensive resource guide. And so that includes individuals from student services, which can be a very broad umbrella. You can think of, I mean, many of the things we have here, but dean of students office, things of that sort. Financial aid, obviously, is going to be really important to have some information and some connection with those people. Counseling services, advising, accessibility, marketing, that's another big issue that people have identified. And so having someone from that team, especially if they're very student focused or oriented, like they may have a lot of good insight. IT, and then obviously we want students, we want their voice, some shared governance, and also just simply they're going to be able to know what will catch and keep students' attention, as well as what students need more than anyone else. And so identifying student leaders or others, or students who've already accessed support services if they're comfortable, um, because they will be the ones who know what was easy, what was hard, who helped them the most, what areas seemed to be more siloed from others. They're going to have a very unique perspective. And so, involved in identifying these cross-departmental planning group, you're going to need to then establish like clear expectations. How often are we going to meet? And what is our goal of this resource guide? Is it, and this is very closely connected to target audience of like, are we really wanting to focus on like supporting our like nursing program? Because we've noticed that a lot of these students are really like like show a lot of promise, and they get in here and in this first semester they're rocking it. But by the time the second semester comes here, a lot of them are experiencing a lot of financial hardship because of how demanding the coursework is. They may not have as much bandwidth to work outside of class. And so how can we, help them identify ways to like what resources that they are eligible for? This can apply to a lot of different students. That's just an example. So here's some examples of uh, like kind of expectations to think through. How often will the group meet? What roles and responsibilities will each member take? And kind of what are the communication norms? At ISU, we use Teams, and so we have, maybe we need to create a Teams channel for this, and this is we put all the files here, and when you've got major updates, make posts about it so that people are aware of where we're at. And is if you use Google, maybe you have a Google Drive folder for this, and this is where you keep all of the files so that if anyone has to kind of phase in or out of the group, like they don't have to recreate any of the work that's already been done. Um, some potential like examples of goals that could be modified or used just as inspiration is to create clarity, equity, and ease of use for students with diverse backgrounds and needs. And so, like, as you're then creating the resource or as you're in conversation with one another and the students, like, you can ask yourselves, how is this making things more clear? How is this making things more equitable? How is this making things easier for students? Those are the questions that you can ask yourselves repeatedly as a goal statement to keep you on track. Some target audiences are obviously the ones that we had in mind of like women, low income students, students of color, but as well as even as simple as like freshmen or transfer students or prospective students. These are all different populations that may help you orient what kinds of resources you're looking for, what kind of student feedback are you expecting, and generally how to structure the information as you communicate it. And then you'll want to set deadlines and milestones because if a project team comes together and you don't have when the project is due, it may never get done. And so some examples of milestones, I'm not going to read through all these, but it's like we need to have goals and expectations set by like 1 month, spend a month in conversation and deliberation about that. And then maybe um, after that, establish like who and what departments on campus and like people give them time to like figure out off campus people that they want to contact. That includes things like transportation professionals like in the community or childcare service providers, uh, like governmental entities like VA or like SNAP and things like that to make sure that you know how to guide students to the resources that are available to them inherently, either governmentally or in the community, as well as on campus. And to determine the uniform information. I'll get to that in just a second. But like, so this is an example. Uh, I know that for me, and I think this applies to many students, is that like I don't have all the time in the world. I'm busy, and also social media has definitely impacted our attention spans. So like, let's make sure that we're being concise and like accessible in the information we gather. So like let's see what is the both minimal and most impactful information that the student needs to have their needs met. And so name and location of the place. When is it open? A very brief description, like 2 to 4 sentences, and the contact information of that organization or office. And so this could look like, um, oh, let me think. The YMCA, the YWCA has like maybe like free childcare 1 day a week for some reason, or whatever. I'm creating something out of thin air here. But you'd put the YWCA at this location on their give their address. This is from, their hours of operation are 8 to 8 every day. A brief description of, the YWCA is this, and they, provide childcare from these hours as well as, offer other services. And here's the email address and phone number of their general office. So now if a parent um, needs to have their like child watched on that day, then maybe they reach out there because that's a good backup plan or something. And so as you as a committee or a work group have determined like, okay, these are the 4 pieces of information we want, we've created like a template email that you could send. Um, and so I know that sometimes it can be kind of difficult to just like sit and look at either a blank email or a blank project and be like, oh my gosh, I need to like ask them 1,000 questions and they're gonna like get overwhelmed. And so here's a starting point. Obviously, you can modify it with your own goal. You can um, change the questions that you're asking if you all determine that there's a different question that you're wanting to look for here, but this is just a general idea. And giving a deadline. Again, if deadlines aren't given, people won't get things done. I'm looking at the time. I'm gonna make sure we get through this all. Um, so now there's just some kind of general idea of like what organizations, both on and off campus, need to be contacted, who are the information, and then who on the team is going to reach out to them. So are there workforce partners? Do you know that there are like employers in the community that have initiatives that support students or can help students get access to employment? Are there local food pantries? Um, in an appendix I'll show you soon, we have a lot more examples, but I think of like many times churches or other like community centers and things of that sort have like weekly potlucks or free like pancake breakfast on Saturdays or whatever. Um, and especially in some communities, there's probably one like like one community partner doing that almost every day. Will it be that student's favorite food every single time? Probably not. But they could probably find at least a meal most days by hopping around through that. Um, and so maybe identifying somebody on the team who can reach out to a lot of those community organizations and creating a small schedule of like, hey, many of them do weekly meals. Here's when they most frequently do that, and here's their contact information if you want to reach out. Um, and then on-campus ones are also important to kind of navigate that. And make sure you delegate that to specific people so that people know that, hey, it's my responsibility to contact that person. And then when you go to disseminate it, we talked a little bit about Media Blitz, but that's what a lot of this page is for, is to um, help you kind of brainstorm and think through what does that look like. Think through like student portal announcements, the brief and class announcements. Let's keep that short and, in fact, brief. Um, but so those are some of the kind of communication and dissemination efforts right here, just to give you space to think through that. Okay. So that gets us to the conclusion that students do have a lot of persisting barriers to accessing education, to accessing your programs, and you all have been very creative and have a lot of solutions to those. And sometimes students don't always know about them. And so this is just one way to try to address that barrier as well as some of the others that were identified. And so I want to jump down to the resources just to give you kind of a sneak peek into the appendices. But I'm not going to read through all of them and, exhaustively. But so sometimes having success metrics, data points are an important way to kind of show like, hey, before we were doing this, this is how much students were accessing our support services. And then after, this is how much they were. And so this can be a lot of these are prompts to show you like these are the kinds of questions, the kinds of data that you can reference and start like getting some sort of longitudinal way of showing and developing a narrative and story around like how this could help students. Here's another way of looking at that with some other metrics. I'll let you all be able to kind of return to that later. And then that fillable form has a lot of the similar information as Appendix C, but this just has also like other suggestions and things of that sort. So also don't want to belabor it too much, but there's just more fleshed out information to kind of be reviewed here. And then finally, Appendix D. And you're like, okay, Dalton, thank you so much for all of this. That was all so like broad and free to do and contextualize as I please. Is anyone even doing this? And this is where I want to show you. I'm just going to do quick clicks. Okay, Parkland has a great example of this. And so here they have a website version of this, and you can see Champaign-Urbana community resources, and you can see crisis and emergency ones um, that can talk about a lot of these other things, domestic violence, emergency child care. So here's they have stuff that's available in their community. And so this is one way that others have done that. Interactive resource map, food pantries in the area, things of that sort. And I think, is it this one that I wanted to? Yeah, here's another one that I really liked this one in part because like, hey, here's what you may be looking for. Here's our hours, as well as like, do you need to apply for SNAP? Here's exactly the information that we could give you. And so this could allow students very quickly to assess like, okay, what's my household size? Am I eligible? What are like the questions that need to be like answered? And then be able to talk to support staff if they have other questions. And so there's a lot of other resources that could help students budget or plan meals and things of that sort that are affordable and nutritious. And so each of these colleges have some form of resource library and comprehensive guide, but this is just kind of a way to help the entire system create and or contextualize their resource guide for students that may not know that exists. So that is the website and the resource. So I'm going to stop sharing and open up for question.
So if you all have any questions, feel free to type that in the chat, or you can raise your hand. We should be able to unmute you that way. We'll give it about a minute or so here, and then we will take the silence as you love it. It's an amazing tool. Can't wait to get your hands on it and use it. I will also put my email in the chat here in case anyone has questions at a later time.
Yep. And
Feel
there's mine
free.
as well.
So you can feel free to email either myself or Dalton or both. If you are browsing around the website and really kind of looking into it and have any questions or comments, please feel free to share those thoughts with us. But other than that, I'm going to take the silence is no questions, and I'm going to use a phrase that I've learned to really dislike, but I'm going to give you 5 minutes back to your day. We're wrapping up early. So thank you all for joining us this morning. We hope this was helpful. We hope this tool will be helpful. And like I said, if you have any questions, comments, thoughts about it, please feel free to email Dalton and I.
Mhm.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.